Welcome everyone, a good Erev Shabbos Kodesh. I'm recording over here in Lodz, Poland, a place of the city that was the one of the biggest, third biggest city of Jewish population in 1939 in the world. Behind New York City, Warsaw, then came Lodz, and became in those 4 or 5 years afterwards a place of great destruction. But let's talk about rebuilding. Let's talk about Kedusha. Let's talk about Parshas Metzorah. And we're told in Parshas Metzorah of the tzaras, and the Torah describes a number of different tzaras. You have tzaras haguf, then you have tzaras begodim, and then you have tzaras habayis. Tzaras haguf, tzaras habegodim, and tzaras habayis. And if you look at the psukim very carefully, at the end of Tazria and Metzorah, you'll notice that tzaras haguf is one section. Tzaras begodim is linked to tzaras haguf, and then a separate section altogether, tzaras habayis. And when you think about it, what's the idea? Why this separation? There's really two very distinct parshios of tzaras. Tzaras haguf and tzaras begodim comes because of lashon hara. And the consequence of this tzaras is that you have to isolate from the tzibur. You did not treat your fellow man properly. You encroached, if you will, on his personal space, on his personal approach, and therefore, by speaking lashon hara, therefore you have to be in quarantine, a sense of quarantine. You have to be isolated. You have to reflect and think about your place and your relationship with other people. So you're going to be isolated until you can figure that out in the proper way. That's tzaras haguf. Tzaras habayis is very different. The Gemara tells us, and Chazal explain in Midrashim, that one of the reasons that tzaras habayis comes about is because a person was miserly with his property. He didn't lend out his things. He has household items, a hammer, screwdriver, lawnmower, and his friend wants to borrow it. He says, "No, I'm sorry, I don't have it. I don't have." He doesn't relate properly to his community. And what happens? His house develops tzaras. And then what happens as a result? His house becomes tamei, so he has to go ahead before the Kohen comes. And in the tamei everything, he has to go ahead and take everything out of the house. Ooh, what an exposure. Now all of a sudden everyone sees you did have a lawnmower, you did have a hammer. And he becomes exposed. In other words, he is brought out into the community. It's the exact opposite of what you have when it comes to tzaras haguf. Tzaras haguf, he trespassed the space of others. That requires quarantine. Tzaras habayis, he wasn't giving enough to others, and therefore he has to be exposed to others. These are two different parshas, two different spiritual diseases, so to speak, that come from a spiritual malaise, a physical disease that comes from spiritual malaise, but come from two different standpoints. The one thing that we learned all week here in Poland is that Hitler Yamach Shemam, the Nazis Yamach Shemam, they did not discriminate between Jews. A Jew, if you had any kind of Jewish blood in you, a grandmother, grandfather, any Jewish blood in you, you were someone that needed to be destroyed. In our relationships with each other, we have to understand that Yid is a Yid, and we have to go ahead and treat our fellow man with great respect, never ever, Rahman al-Litzlan, speaking lashon hara, and be giving, being generous, being sharing, understanding that every single Jew is our brother, and a sense of respect for Klal Yisrael. Have a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.